Hi, I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography here in beautiful, sunny Naples, Florida. And today, we take a look at the 60mm f2.8 macro lens from Olympus. Before we begin this review, let me offer up a brief disclaimer. You may want to take this video with a grain of salt, as I am not much of a macro shooter. I never really have been. But after experimenting with Olympus's 60mm f2.8 macro, I just may become one. Therefore, use this review if you're like me and you're considering getting into macro photography. That said, is the 60mm macro another gem in the Olympus lens lineup? Well, let's have a look. If you want to get up really close, I mean really close, you're going to need a macro lens. And for the Micro Four Thirds system, there really only are a few native options available. Olympus introduced the 60mm macro last year to great fanfare, with only a few detractors. Which camp am I in? Well, let's go on to the review and find out. First up is build quality. Overall, I'd say it's pretty good. It's light as a feather. Given its relative size, it's kind of a big lens. Comes in at only 185 grams, or just over 6.5 ounces. When I tap on it here, you can tell it's a bit tinny, a bit plasticky, and not all that solid. Though it's made out of plastic, it's a reasonably nice grade of plastic, but it's not as high grade as most of the Canon lenses that are out there, but I wouldn't call it cheap, nor is it bulletproof. The focus ring is really nice and smooth. I mean, it's really nice and smooth. It has a focus limiter switch here. I don't know if you can see that, which, like almost everything else in the Micro Four Thirds system, it's really small, and frankly, I find this very cumbersome to use. If you're going 1-to-1, you actually have to use this right here, if you can see that, to focus the camera. And frankly, doing this while holding a tripod or trying to keep everything steady and moving this thing, it's even with the IS system or the built-in 5-axis IS system of the OMD, it still becomes a bit of a challenge. Now, this is my first real foray into macro photography, so I don't know if this is normal. I just know that I don't like this system at all, so that's just me. On the plus side, Olympus claims the lens is weather sealed. Feeling it, it's kind of hard to believe that it is weather sealed, but they say it is, so I'm going to go go with that. I'm just not that convinced because it doesn't feel all that, I don't know, I can't describe it. It doesn't feel all that well put together. I just don't believe it's weather sealed. You have to handle one to see what I'm talking about. Anyway, it's not bad by any stretch, but it certainly isn't great. On the downside, it does not come with a lens hood, which we think is a bit of a negative. Overall, for build quality, we're going to go ahead and give this a 7 out of 10. All right, so up next is focus speed and accuracy. If I have an issue with the 60mm macro, it's with the autofocusing system. The focus motor is really fast, but the lens tends to hunt a lot, but at least it does so quickly. The limiter switch has 4 settings. Actually, there's 3. The 4th one's a manual adjustment that you use to get the autofocus to focus in a 1-to-1 situation, which is really, really close. Given how precise the distance meter is, I found that too often I'm getting caught in between the appropriate setting, and I find the AF sails past the intended target a bit more often than I'd like. The limiter switch can be really frustrating to use. On the flip side, I found that manually focusing the lens, like most macro lenses, was a better way to go when I was getting really close, because in those situations, the AF is sort of all over the place. And with the 1-to-1 setting, I found that having to hold the 1-to-1 switch in place while simultaneously keeping the camera still and taking the photo was a really cumbersome process. Of course, many of these issues are solved if you manually focus. Let me just demo the AF system here real quick. There's a bottle right here in front of the lens. It's actually a bottle of off bug spray. So I'm going to press and hold the AF here, and let's see what it does. I don't know if you saw that, but the AF sailed past, then came back, and then it caught focus. And that's pretty common as far as how it actually operates. That's usually what I'm seeing. It's pretty consistent. So it's not perfect. It tends to hunt a little bit, but it does lock in. And when it does, it's pretty accurate. As a side note, the focus works great when it's not in a macro situation. Like, for example, if I'm shooting a portrait with the lens. On the bottom line, though, or in summary, given how cumbersome it is to use for its intended macro purpose, that is the AF, I can only give the AF speed and accuracy a 7 out of 10. Up next is optical quality and the quality of the results. This is where the 60mm f2.8 macro really excels. It's a really nice optic, if you can get it to focus. I found the center to be sharp, and the lens is capable of producing some really great images. It's not as sharp at the edges, but the depth of field is so narrow that sometimes it's difficult to tell. In addition to macro, the lens does a really nice job doubling as a portrait lens, because with a 120mm full-frame field of view equivalent, it's a perfect portrait length. Given its macro capabilities and its ability to double as a portrait lens, we think it does a nice job at both, and that makes the lens a little bit more versatile. It's important to note that the lens is also part of Olympus's MSC line, or movie and still compatible. That said, it's one thing to talk about a lens's capabilities, it's another thing to actually demonstrate them. The next 60 seconds are going to be stills and short video clips taken with the Olympus 60mm f2.8 macro. Last but not least is value. At $499 US, it's actually a pretty good value compared to the Panasonic Leica 45mm macro, which is $749, as these two are the current mainstream macro lenses for the Micro Four Thirds system. The Olympus has a nice optical quality, reasonably fast AF, if not all that accurate, and when it works really well, as the results are quite impressive. All in, it's a pretty solid value. I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8.5 out of 10. Okay, it's time to draw some conclusions and wrap up this review and grade the Olympus 60mm f2.8 macro. In a nutshell, the build quality. It's pretty nice. It's not the best grade of plastic, but it's not bad either. The focus limiter switch here is a bit cumbersome to use. On the plus side, the 60 is weather sealed, and it's just a featherweight of a lens, coming in at just over 6.5 ounces. For build quality, we gave it a 7 out of 10. Optical quality and the quality of the results. It's really great when you can get it to focus. When you do get it to focus, it's really sharp with a nice narrow depth of field and really pretty bokeh rendering. As an added bonus, it does a really great job doubling as a portrait lens. It also does really well with video. In summary, the results are quite impressive. We gave it a 9 out of 10 for both optical quality and the quality of the results. Focus speed and accuracy. For me personally, this is a bit of a sore spot for this lens. Most macro lenses are manually focused, and you may be better off using the manual focus option, as the autofocus with this lens is really tricky, specifically in macro situations. As we discussed, on the flip side, the autofocus works really great when you're using it as a traditional lens, like for a portrait. We gave it a 7 out of 10. Value. It's about a third less expensive than its nearest competitor, and that's the 45mm Panasonic Leica, and apparently it offers up a slightly better performance. As an optic, it's really good. The focus works much better manually when you're shooting macro, and the AF does quite well in non-macro situations. On the downside, the 60mm doesn't come with a lens hood, and with a full-frame field of view equivalent of 120mm, it limits you to its intended purpose of macro, but there is some value as a portrait lens too. For value, we gave it an 8.5 out of 10. Overall, it's a 40.5 out of 50, and it gets our recommended rating. The final word. If you're just getting into macro photography, this really is a decent optic for the Micro Four Thirds system. If you're needing to get up really close, you may, however, want to manually focus and invest in a really sturdy tripod. This is Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography in beautiful, not so sunny Naples, Florida today. Thanks for watching. Oh, and by the way, if you like these reviews, be sure to subscribe. And until the next time, happy shooting.